Right, so good afternoon, everyone. And I want to thank Dr. K and Dr. K. I don't want to massacre your last name. Ketchup, all right. For inviting me to India. This is my first trip here, and I was so excited when I was invited because I am one of those old school. I'm really old school. I grew up watching Dharmendra, Amitabh Bachchan, Mamalin, so it was like, okay, I'm in India, you know, with all the people, the India movies that I watched. But this has been great. It really has been a very cool presentation. I feel a little bit of a fish out of water because my research expertise is really in the area of translational research into implementation science and dissemination research to be able to improve community disparities within the community as well as social determinants of health. But what I would like to focus on is, you know, I work a lot with a lot of people in basic science, which is like genomics research, because I kind of try to describe that there are ways that we can do this research that we can better, most probably look at the ancestry as well as ancestral markers to study disparities effectively. So what I want to first of all do is just, you know, give you a global landscape of prostate cancer burden. I think you've seen that already, so I'm going to really skip through this. This is what you see. The GlobalCan data 2018, the latest data, talks to you about, you know, the areas of cancer and how we have cancer. You can see when you're looking at both gender that you have prostate cancer is most probably number 1, 2, 3, 4, number 4 in the world. Where you are looking at just males, the incidence prostate cancer is number 2, so it's really huge. When you're looking at prevalence of prostate cancer within the world, it is number 1. And when you're looking at mortality, it's kind of like a right out there. One of the things that I do, because I have a global research platform, is sort of take a look at the different regions and see which countries do we have with respect to prostate cancer. And I work very, very well in the American region, and you can see US is number 1 for prostate cancer cases. US is also number 1 for prostate cancer deaths. And when you're looking at the African region, Nigeria is number 1 for cases, and Nigeria is number 1 for death. And just kind of keep this you know, map in your head a little bit more, because I'm going to talk a little bit more about the importance of migration studies and why we are studying blacks across the population. So just kind of keep it in your head. So the next thing that I want to talk about, you know, I'm so excited about the work that is going on in India, and you know, and you would see from the questions I'm asking, I keep asking the questions, are you looking at cohorts from other populations, you know, because the environment does modulate the gene. This is the whole point of epigenetics. So just studying the cohorts within the country does not really give us a good perception of what health disparities are. The ability to be able to look at those who have migrated from those countries in other regions and what you have within them is really very interesting. So, you know, you can take a picture of this. Earlier on, in 2006, is really when I started looking at black is not really black. Black is not a homogeneous. A lot of people, when they're talking about research, they talk as if black is one group. They're different. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So we started looking at prostate cancer. When you think about prostate cancer, there are 3 confirmed risk factors for prostate cancer. You have the family history, you have the age, and then you have the race, and then they say it's black. So the question for us is, if black is actually one of the risk factors for prostate cancer, does that mean all black? And what is black? What kind of black are you talking about? So instead of comparing black and white, after 10 years of me doing research that compare black and white United States, I just said to myself, it's really stupid to be comparing black and white. It's like you're comparing orange to apple. Why don't you compare blacks and blacks and try to figure out if black is a risk factor, what are the differences within the black? And I think that actually set the pace for me when you're looking at migration studies. So this is what we have in the United States, and you can see as already presented that blacks really have disproportionate burden of prostate cancer all over the world, globally. The race black does. But the question then becomes, what is black? I mean, a lot of scientists, they talk about, okay, black have this, black have that. I mean, if you look at this is a very simplistic view of black in America, very simplistic view. And what do you have? You have people who self-identify themselves as black. You have the native-born US blacks who have been there since the slave era. They were, brought through the transatlantic slave trade. And you have people like me, who are foreign-born blacks. I'm originally from Nigeria. I'm African. And, that's where my background is. I moved into the United States in the 80s. And so, about the foreign-born blacks, you have the African immigrants, you have the Caribbean immigrants, you have the South American immigrants, you have the European black immigrants. Relative to the native-born US blacks, you have the true natives from the slave era, and then you have the new natives, people who are my children. I had 3 kids in the United States, 2 girls and a boy, and they were born, raised in the United States. So they are actually the new natives. And then you have the new natives who are other of African ancestry, like my children, right? And then you have the ones that are Caribbean ancestry, South American ancestry, and European ancestry. And if you break this down, I actually developed this map in 2006. This is what you have, but this is really very simplistic because you have intermarriage and you have crossbreeding, not only within the black population, but also blacks and white, blacks with Asia. You do have that population, and then you have. So the question is that you just ask people, who is African American in here? You look at them in the United States, everybody here is labeled African American. Actually, nobody here is African American because all these people are actually residing in other countries, and the people write down, this is my family, right? That's my husband, these are my children, right? So they are not typically African American. To make it a little bit more complicated, I want to just kind of show you. Here is my daughter, and here is her husband when they got married about 3 years ago, and he is true native from the transatlantic slave trade, right? Never been to Africa before. And my daughter is a new native here, and here is my first granddaughter, right? And here is she's a mixture of African ancestry that is recent and a mixture of that. Then you have to ask yourself, makes it a little bit more complicated. He actually did his genetic ancestry, and the biggest one that he has is actually that's 4% from Nigeria, right? So when people kind of think of saying, blacks have the most disproportionate burden, black is this, like you're not really talking about a homogeneous group. So in 2005, I said, after I've kind of worked in this area, I started working in prostate cancer disparity in 495. It was obvious that millions of dollars were being spent. We all coming to the same issue. Disparities is not being addressed effectively among blacks. We started thinking about the fact that one racial ethnic group of blacks really is not looking at the heterogeneity of the health outcomes. So we started disaggregate blacks. But how many of you know that foreign-born blacks, especially African blacks in the United States, their health status is actually equal to Europeans, whites, when they first of all get to the United States? So you're actually seeing that foreign-born blacks really don't have that disproportionate disparities that you see in most cases, quite different. So it's very important to study the source population of blacks. That is where the migration study started from. Because we started asking the questions, when you begin to disaggregate blacks, and you begin to ask the question that what happens when you compare these blacks to where they actually came from, right? So, in 2005, I decided to take sabbatical, and I was part of my sabbatical. I actually studied the slave trade because I wanted to figure out where are the blacks from the United States coming from. Because if I really wanted to understand prostate cancer disparities in, I would rather compare US blacks to the blacks who they are connected with as part of the transatlantic slave trade. That's the best way to do, because they are the same genetic pool. And so if there are differences, it's the environment that is modulating the differences. So one of the things that I found, if you look at it, where they originally came from, you will see that it's usually the West Africa slave trade region is right here. Who knows which countries are right here? Just shout them out. Nigeria, yep. Ivory Coast, Senegal, yes. And so for me, right back from 2005, I just decided, if I want to understand disparities in blacks, I'm just going to focus on those blacks who are connected by the transatlantic slave trade. And we're going to look at the differences among those blacks. And it's interesting that you mentioned Nigeria, because like I said, I did study the transatlantic slave trade to be able to understand the populations that I want to study. And there are two regions that actually produce the highest number of slaves for the transatlantic slave trade. And those regions is called the Bight of Benin and the Bight of Biafra. And the majority of those regions are people who are from Nigeria, right? So I'm not sure how many people have seen those studies. This is a really great study that talks about unraveling the hidden ancestry of American and mixed populations, and they look at blacks and they ask the question for the US blacks, where are they originally from? And you can find that they're European, not surprisingly, their European DNA primarily comes from United Kingdom, and their African DNA from the Yoruba people, mostly from Nigeria. And so, even as scientists, when you are studying a group of people, you really need to know geographically how they're connected. So, for example, if you want to look at disparities in blacks in the United States, and you want to understand that, going to pull somebody from South Africa makes absolutely no sense. Because the blacks in South Africa have little connection with the blacks in the United States. So it's very important that you understand not only the ecological or the geography or the DNA, you really need to have an understanding of when I'm comparing populations that are very important, I need to compare apples and apples and not apple and oranges, right? So this is actually from the article, and then they did describe where the DNAs are coming from. This is why all roads leads to Africa with respect to genetic research, especially those who are looking at African Americans and those who want to understand African Americans. The majority of the people that I meet who are scientists that we work together, I meet them in Africa. Very interesting. I travel to Africa a lot. I meet them in Africa because they are there to be able to collaborate with scientists in Africa. So this, I'm sure you're very familiar with it. This is why it's very advantageous to be able to look at people of African ancestry. It gives you the genetic architecture of the disease, such as cancer. You can identify the SNPs, and there you can look at clinical tools to be able to look at that particular population. The same thing with what is being done in India. I think this is for me, sitting through this conference, listening to the stuff going on in India is very, very key and important. The question turns to my mind that, okay, are we looking at the populations who are currently out of India and taking those cohorts and comparing them? I'm going to describe one of the studies that we are doing. That is the migration study, definitely, and of course, you know the differences between one and not. So in 2005 is when I began to struggle with the idea that I've spent 10 years of my life looking at prostate cancer disparities. We are not really making any differences, and we're making like a few variants that we are explaining in the prostate cancer disparities, and it just occurred to me that we really need to change the way that we think. I look at multi-level collaborative translation and global research, and that's when I decided I was going to form the Prostate Cancer Transatlantic Consortium. And essentially what it means is that we are going to study groups who are connected by the transatlantic slave trade. So we are very purposeful in the countries that are part of our research so that we are able to really understand what is going on. So why did we form this this consortium? Because the problem of prostate cancer is very crucial. If we want to understand the genetic and the environmental and look at epigenetics of diseases, we really need to look at prostate cancer in black men globally. And we have really made a whole lot of huge stride, and I'm going to show in just kind of summarizing some of the things that we found. But it was found in 2005. In 2011, we actually applied to the NCI to become an approved NCI consortium. We were approved the first time that we went up for the for NCI. This is our program director, Dr. Damali Martin, and is an open consortium comprises of clinicians, scientists, survivors, advocates. We are in countries, like I said, that are connected by the transatlantic slave trade. We currently have over 150 scientists and 12 countries that are significant. This is where we are, and you can see from where we are mostly in countries that are connected by the transatlantic slave trade. So this is the leadership, and I want to kind of pause a little bit and talk a little, for just about 1 minute about our leadership. When we pick our leadership, we are very purposeful with our leadership. And you can see we do have a lot of significant leaders from West Africa. And, I was talking earlier on to catch up about now you messed with my mind. K, I was talking with Dr. K earlier on about how, I've been doing research in Africa since 2005. And how heartbreaking it is, which India doesn't have that problem now. And so kudos to you in India, that people practice what is called as the vampire science. Vampire science. You go to Africa, you collect samples, you do the study, you present it, and there's not one single African that you recognize. And they're not even in your papers. They're not on your grants. That is really disastrous. I mean, that is like going back to colonialism. I mean, it's like you did it before, and now we are going back and doing it in academia. So we kind of have to be very careful with that. So going on, this is kind of some of the interactions that we have. We are very big in coming together every 2 years in the area of the science that we do. We have workshops and social media and things like that. You are all invited to our conference. Inviting you to the conference is because for the very first time, because we're going to have the conference in Barcelona this time around. And so the European Urological Association has approached us, is not only looking at blacks, because we typically focus on looking at blacks all over the world, but straight academic. It's a good way to continue the conversation that we started here. The primary goals that we have is consortial collaboration, because we are kind of moving from team science to now being able to have people who have different consortium just collaborating together and being able to sort of merge our data together. So lots of publications. We have over 70 consortium publications. We are very proud of special issues. We are big in special issues because we have a team science. We have thousands of data. And so at one point in time, there could be about 15 papers that we are working on. So we do special issues. We are very proud of the special issue that we have in cancer health disparities. We thank Dr. K for that opportunity. We have book chapters. We have significant grant awards. One of the special things that we have is because we are an NCR consortium, we really have connection in being able to do a whole lot of work. I'm going to highlight a few of this in a minute, and also the projects that we do. Okay, so this summarizes what we're doing. So I didn't talk about science, but I want you to know that the black portion is my area of science. As a consortium, the thing I like about our consortium is that when we do a study, we are not only doing the study for the sake of publishing that study for that particular publication. We are actually building a model, and we are interested in building a model of prostate cancer risk, protective, and personal factors in blacks all over the world. So we kind of look at how do we explain the prostate cancer morbidity and mortality? What are the risk and protective factors? What are the genetic factors that are related? What are the non-behavioral factors? What are the behavioral factors? And so every time that we have findings and publications, we sort of modify this model. And this is what we do, because this is the big picture. This is the only way that we can address disparities in blacks. We have to know what is going on, and then we take whatever we find to be able to do this. I want to quickly talk about this two studies that is really very unique and interesting. We were invited about 3 or 4 years ago by the NCI to provide FFPE tissue of men of African ancestry, and so I think we provided about 300 to the NCI, and it was to determine whether DNA and RNA can be obtained from archival FFPE, and it was very successful. We had 220 samples exome sequence and 172 samples RNA sequence. We have clinical data from 176. We are currently working on papers for these articles, and I think within the next 3 months or so, this data is actually going to be deposited into the GWAS. So you will have, any scientist will have the ability to be able to do it. This is the first time that we're going to get this from the West African population. So we're very proud of that. Another study that we are doing, we are now over, I think we are in the 1800 data collected, is we are actually recruiting West African black men from West Africa, and then we are recruiting their relatives from the United States. And we are going to start recruiting from Europe as well, because we wanted to create a familiar cohort of West African black men, and then figure out that if you have relatives, so for example, I have brothers and a sister in Nigeria. So if I am in the US and I've lived in the US for many years, what are my risk factors to getting cancer compared to them that are actually predominantly related? This is I think when we reach the mark of 500 is when we publish in cancer disparities. You can look at the cancer disparity paper. It has genetic, behavioral, all covered. So it will give you a sense of what we're doing. We're kind of working on another one right now for the Journal of Global Oncology. So we are very excited. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the Iron Man study. Great. So we are actually, the Iron Man project is funded by the Prostate Cancer Clinical Trials Consortium, and part of this is also funded by the Movember Foundation and a lot of pharmaceutical companies. And essentially, the goal is to establish population-based registry that they could actually look at advanced prostate cancer from all over the world, right? And then be able to determine overall survival and patient-related outcomes. And so they approached us to expand it to Africa, to West Africa. So we actually are going to get started with this project. Everything is set. We are in the middle of our IRB, and we're going to be the first group that for them from West Africa. So we're very excited about this, because what it does is that it's going to provide a whole lot of biobank samples on advanced and clinical outcomes, behavioral outcomes, samples, for the very first time, that connects a lot of people from all over the world together, because they're collecting samples from all over the world. We are also, we just recently got a contract from NCI, Leidos Biomedical Research, from the Clinical Proteomic Tumor Analysis Consortium. How many people are familiar with the CaPTC Consortium? Great. We have one person. This is really a great thing that a number of you might want to think about. It requires writing a contract, which is quite different from writing a grant. But it was launched by the NCI in 2011, and it is really purpose is to really look at the molecular basis of cancer through the application of proteome and genome analysis. And this is essentially what they have. They have different factors, and then they do the analysis, and they're going to be depositing it into GWAS. This really provides a unique opportunity for you to be able to study your population. So you might want to kind of think about this and join in this. I want to conclude, by saying that, and I think I talked to Dr. K about this. To be honest with you, we have moved from being team science. Team science does not work now. You have to be a consortium, to be honest with you. Because if you're doing team science on a small scale, you're not looking at population. But if you're a consortium, then you really can leverage resources and pull resources together. But in fact, we are saying that, and this is one of the reasons why, for me, it was exciting to come here, and I'm going to the Middle East shortly after this trip. Actually, tomorrow I'm going to surrounding Dubai, because to me it's not really about the consortium now, it's about the consortia actually partnering together. So you have to have all these consortiums. So for me, in my mind, if I'm supposed to dream big, between my consortium and I have a sister consortium, the Afro-Caribbean Consortium, we pretty much have the whole Black world covered. So we have sites in Europe, we have in the Americas, we have in the Caribbean, we have in every part of Africa, we have it very much covered. But for me, if we're going to be able to look at ancestry and cancer, to be able to partner with your consortium here, to be able to partner with the ones in the Middle East, it really will give us access to different populations that we might be able to do a whole lot of study on. So I think I introduced my program director to you. This is actually the NCI EGLP supported consortium. So if you have a consortium and you have not applied, and it's global, so it's not restricted to the United States. If you have an existing consortium or you're thinking of a consortium, you really need to talk to them out. And you need to apply to become an NCI designated consortium. Because it allows you to be able to pull data. So there's a critical need to pull resources, skills, and disciplines together. What we've done in my consortium is we are now using uniform measures and procedure. It's been outstanding. When we started collaborating together, one of the things that we said to ourselves is that if we are studying prostate cancer in blacks, we want to have uniform measures. So we develop a uniform measures. It's 82 pages. It has clinical data, behavioral data, epi data, access to biospecimens. And what has happened is that this uniform measures is what we are using. We've already collected about 1,800 samples. Afro-Caribbean also almost 1,000. And so we can integrate our data. We are now in the middle of integrating our data together. Once we integrate our data together, we are going to have data from all over the world for Black populations. So another thing that I want to say is that if you are really doing some neat things in your consortium, please strongly think about uniform measures. That way you can really integrate your data together, right? And then the global virtual repository as well is very important. I'm done. Acknowledgement. We've been, I want to acknowledge we have a global team. I want to acknowledge our study participants. We have recruited over 20,000 participants and still counting. To contact us, we are, United States. We have an African group also, and this is our website. Our website is actually hosted by the National Cancer Institute because we are an NCR consortium. Questions, next generation. This is my granddaughter. You can see, I'm a proud grandma.
Yeah.
I'm happy to answer questions that you might have.
Yeah, thank you. Now the